thanks everybody for joining today. Like Chris said, we're partnered with Maverick and love working with them. The Aero points have been a great thing to kind of pair with drones and turn them from what was maybe a hobby tool into a real professional grade tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over a few things like the evolution of capabilities, just drones in general, and sort of accuracy and where the market has come. Introduce our products and a little bit about Propeller. Understand like where the best market fit is, like who the ideal Propeller customer is, and then we'll maybe just pop into the platform for a little bit, like nothing too in depth, because you know, I'm conscious of everybody's time and also might not apply to your individual industries, but we'll like pop in there so that at least you can see it, and then if you want to do some follow-up, you know, more personalized demos, we can arrange that with Chris, Logan, or the guys from Maverick. So this chart here just gives us an idea of like where things were and where things have come. So there was a real disconnect a few years back when the industry first began, and you know, we all wanted to see drones as a tool that could change the way we operated. We had really big expectations that they would revolutionize operations, and that they could give like really clear and accurate site measurements. But the reality was they were really only producing on-demand, affordable aerial imagery, just like the images. That's where things were. So as you can see, like, you know, the expectations really high, capabilities not so much. So you go ahead a couple of years, you know, 2016, 2017, and capabilities started to catch up with the expectations, but there's still pretty low adoption. And now when we fast forward to today, we're really able to offer confidence in the measurements, which is key. Not just being able to say, oh yeah, it's accurate. We can give you a way to like measure that accuracy and real industry specific value. So it's no longer, oh yeah, like drones are cool and they're going to do all these things for these different industries. It's more like, hey, if you're a construction site, we can put tools in your hand that will allow you to measure and manage your site yourself, right? Or if you're a landfill, or if you're a quarry, and so on. So it's very industry specific value. We're now able to balance the capabilities with the expectations. And accuracy is critical. Anyone who's on a site that, you know, measures any kind of volume or any kind of distance, like accuracy is really critical for these work sites. So poor accuracy in a construction site, for example, means poor comparisons of actual work completed versus the design, like what was supposed to be completed, and a really poor understanding of where activity needs to take place. Similarly, in something like mining or in aggregates, it means that like the tonnage that they're planning for is not the tonnage that they extract, which leads to, you know, fluctuations in the finances and maybe some unpleasant surprises where they have either too much stock or too little stock. Same, you know, poor accuracy in waste management leads to cells that are higher than they should be, and potentially thousands lost in regrading a site. So, you know, it's really critical for all kinds of work sites that accuracy matters. If you're doing something that's supposed to be in the commercial context, accuracy does matter. They've been doing things with accuracy all along. They've been doing it with traditional methods like RTK GPS or total station surveying equipment, right? Or even tapes and measures, right? Like it's all about knowing where you are, what you have to move, where you have to move it. So introduce Propeller. You know, we're a player in this space, in the accurate delivery of aerial information. More than 1,800 companies use Propeller. We've processed over 42,000 surveys across more than 10,000 work sites in over 120 countries. So it's a very tried and tested solution. Over 12,000 Propeller users today. We have North American headquarters in Denver, and a lot of our core like development takes place where we originated in Sydney, Australia. So right now we're over 50 staff in 6 countries, speaking a whole lot of languages with 24/7 live customer support. A little bit about the cloud-based software that we offer. So it's an end-to-end photogrammetry tool and has everything from the processing of images all the way to really hardcore analytics that speak to the kinds of questions that the work sites that I touched upon earlier and will touch upon again, that they need answered. But some of the key, some of the kind of high level things, you can access it from anywhere. So it's all cloud-based. There's no, downloads. It's meant for any kind of coordinate system. So if you're not familiar with like the surveying industry, and if you're working on a landfill or if you're working on a construction site, they all have very specific coordinate systems that they operate in. Sometimes they're state plane, like they're tied to the state that you're in. Sometimes they're actually local, like they've been established by a surveyor either at that time or in the not so distant past, and therefore it doesn't really tie into anything else. And all that matters is that you, or the drone data, has to be able to tie into that. We call those local site calibrations. Everything in browser is done in 3D, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. Like not just visualizing in 3D, which is cool and neat. It's really awesome to be able to do that, but all the measurements are actually in 3D as well, which is unique. It's built for tracking inventory. You can calculate current and change stockpile volumes. You can actually automate that whole process and just get an email or send out an email at the end of a week, month, whatever that interval is, and all the stockpile volumes will be sent. It's meant for visual comparison for sure. That you can look at all your data at the same time along a timeline and visually compare surveys. And of course, if you can see it, you can measure it as well. So the ability to be able to measure change over time is also really critical and a critical feature of the product. Because everything is cloud-based, it's also really easy to collaborate with all the different stakeholders. And we've made a system in place where it's highly tailored to the user, so that you can create your own templates, use existing templates, build reports, and so on, usually at the click of one or two buttons, and send those out as necessary. So some of the key things that I like to touch on are that ease of use is critical for the platform, and so we've designed it for technical and non-technical users alike. You don't need a background in the sciences that go into making this imagery useful information. It's accessible to everyone. The tools are really intuitive and smart. A lot of icons, not a lot of text. Building templates and doing reports and so on is really simple. Virtualization and visualization, two of those things, they're becoming hot button items in a lot of industries, but the ability to view and manipulate and work in the 3D environment is really top of class for Propeller, and something we're very proud about. You can translate that into being able to have confidence in the measurements that you're actually making. So if you can see it as well as see the numbers that it's reporting, it's a key thing that people tend to value. We'll go into a few examples where we can intelligently filter out objects that normally would take people time to do on their own, or the expertise to do it, and we do that for them. Another key thing is that we have a very deep customer knowledge on the industries that we serve. So it's one thing to be a very flat platform and kind of accessible to everyone, and then the other thing, or the thing that we've done, is go deep on the verticals that we serve. So whether that's quarrying and mining, civil construction, landfills, or the industries that tend to support them, like survey and engineering, into those industries. We know the industries really well. Local grid support, understanding that they need cut and fill maps. We integrate with various products and know that CAD or design type services are really critical to their workflows. And then the final thing would be on the sharing and deliverables. The ability that we have to collaborate across teams in the cloud is very valuable to these organizations. It reduces people having to make site visits. It allows stakeholders in all kind of areas of the business to gain access to information that might have been siloed in one section before, or maybe held on to by one group of people, where now everyone has access to it. So let's drill into the actual products themselves. I think a lot of people here are interested in the Aero points, and so Here's a quick image of what the arrow points look like. If anyone doesn't have any background in this at all, what arrow points are, they're a smart ground control target. So when you're doing aerial surveying and your drone is in the air and your camera is pointed straight down, you're taking an image on the ground, what arrow points do is they provide a reference on the ground for a known place, a known point. Like in between, like you can see here, there's a kind of checkerboard pattern, and at the center of that checkerboard, there's a GPS. And that GPS is logging the position of that arrow point very, very precisely. And so when you take that point and then you reference it in the image that was taken, then you know exactly where that point is, and you use that point to pull your like all the images tighter and tighter, because you use arrow points, I like to say, like in a constellation, like you use multiples of them. We sell them in a pack of 10, and so you're using 10 on any kind of given work site. All of those work together to pull your imagery tighter and tighter, and then the resultant model tighter and tighter, which leads to higher and higher accurate models. So there's the one thing, the revolutionary part about arrow points is that we've taken the intelligence or the smarts out of like a GPS rover that would cost you, $20,000-$30,000, and we've condensed it into the target itself. So it's the fact that people collect ground control on work sites isn't new. What we've done is we've made it so simple that everyone can do it at any time. There's only one button operation. There's no programming. There's no need to like have any kind of background in surveying. You just lay them out around your site in a pattern that makes sense, and we can kind of go into that. It's a little bit in the details, but you lay them around your site. You press that one button, and they turn on. They're exceptionally durable. Water, dust, shock resistant. Lots of different processing options, but the key thing is that they're simple to use, solar powered. You don't have to worry about charging them. They never run out of battery, and what they'll do is they'll allow you to take like an off-the-shelf drone and create a survey grade result. We recommend the use of them with best-in-class DJI equipment right across the board, from a Phantom 4 Pro to the Inspire 2 and so on, right? And all the way up to the Matrice series and so on. Like what happens is if you take arrow points with off-the-shelf drones, you're creating a survey grade solution, survey grade accuracy, without having to shell out that $30, $40, $50, $100,000 that you can often see for a much higher cost, say like just the drone itself. And really, you need ground control if you care about accuracy, because no matter what, even with a very, very high-end drone, you always want to have something on the ground that you can trust when you walk off that site. So the great thing about DJI drones, as I'm sure my colleagues at Maverick would say, is they're easy to maintain, very easy access to replacement parts, long flight times, small batteries, tried and tested by millions of consumers. If anyone is really new to this industry is regulated, and so kind of know about Part 107. And again, I'm sure my colleagues at Maverick could definitely inform you on that. But it's great, that there is regulation in the industry, because we do want people to always use common sense, and regulation sometimes just kind of regulates common sense. So yeah, the DJI drones are the ones that we generally recommend the most. But arrow points and Propeller is completely drone agnostic, and as long as you can provide geotagged images, or you have some way to geotag the images, then we can process that information, and the arrow points are always something that we can like process and then deliver back to you. So, in sum, like the workflow here is you place the arrow points on the ground. That might take you 10, 15 minutes. You distribute them around a work site, whether that's, 2 acres or 100 acres. You want to distribute all of the arrow points. They work best, and we stand by our accuracy when all 10 of them are used. And so you would put them around the perimeter as much as possible. If there are really high elevation changes, you would put one on like a high point, one on a low point. You certainly just want to have even distribution as much as possible. You get set up, you fly your drone, however long that takes you to set up your drone, fly the site, your drone lands, You can go, as long as the air points are on the ground for 45 minutes, you can then pick them up. You pick them up, and the same button that you press when you put it down, you just press that button once more, and it automatically goes into an upload mode. What it'll do is it will push the raw information from the GPS data into the cloud, and then you can log into your Propeller account for Aero points and choose the way to process them. If you use Propeller for your image processing as well, you can just tie those two together, and it's completely seamless. You can say, okay, here are my images, here's my Aero point survey, go, and we'll process the two of them. If you're doing that, data set is prepared within 24 hours. If it's just the Aero points, that can be just a matter of minutes before that's returned. Sometimes it's a couple of hours. It just depends on when the cores, like the base stations that we tie into, dump their data. So it's a very seamless process if you stay within Propeller. It's a workable process if you decide to use a different processing system. And then you can, log into your platform and analyze and share and do all the analytics and so on that you like. All the data is, you can like take it off and download it in all kinds of common formats, or you can just continue working on it in the cloud. Who are the target customers then for this? The target customer are those who work in these key industries: civil contracting, so civil construction, bulk earthworks, to be precise, mining, quarries, waste management. We're not in agriculture specifically. We don't have analytics for agriculture, but certainly we have customers who are agricultural customers who find it very, very important to know exactly how their fields are sloped for irrigation purposes, for example, or similarly, we would work with environmental monitoring agencies or other industries, but our core customers, or those who we represent the most value to, are civil construction, mining, quarries, and waste management, because they need accurate and repeatable results. So they either typically use ground control points to begin with, or they had some way of collecting, highly precise information. If they outsource survey work, that would be another key thing where there's a real pain point there sometimes, where they're outsourcing survey work and they can in-house some of these answers. Now, we're not replacing surveying. That is not the point here, but there are certain functions that a site can do that helps self-manage themselves, know how they're doing, progressing along, or know, what their productivity levels are and so on, that aren't a requirement of surveying. And that way, if they would have been dependent on a surveyor, for example, for that, they can now do some of these things on their own. So there's definitely like a really big win if they can do that. They typically have too many projects for in-house photogrammetry. So what that means is that they don't want to be using a standalone product where there's just a guy sitting behind a computer all day, every day, just processing data. That's not a valuable use of time. If you can offload that to the cloud, then that person is either not necessary, or they're freed up to do other more high value things. And they tend to have some kind of existing drone knowledge. So either they've researched this and they're aware of the benefits. They're not completely green to this. It doesn't mean that those customers aren't a good fit for the products that we have. It just means that the best customers, like the one where it's like a ding, 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 like this is an immediate opportunity, are those who already understand. They've kind of tried something before. They know that there's value there, but they haven't found it yet. Like we tend to do very well with being able to demonstrate that value. So there's that, or there's users who have surveying and engineering backgrounds who tend to work in these target industries, and they're often looking to improve their own efficiency. So they want to be able to do more jobs in the same amount of time. And so if you use a drone, for example, and Aero points, it takes less time to process than if you were to walk a 100-acre site, for example. Or they need a scalable platform to deliver this information. So if they're using a standalone product, you're typically relying on like a very, very expensive machine to do all this processing. And then you've got these huge files and no way to get them around easily to other people. And so our platform becomes this really great tool to be able to, to share the information with your customers. So in sum, we help work sites ask the right questions of their data to make it work hard for them. And how do we do that? Or what are some of those questions that we're trying to answer? And so I won't, like, we have, I have slides that break this down by industry, but let's just keep this nice and high level, and just look at these 4 kind of categories, and that's progress, productivity, quality, and cost. And so these are the kinds of questions that we want to be able to help answer for customers. Progress is how much is done. How much have I done? How much do I need to do? Productivity is the rate, right? Like, how fast am I going? When will I finish? Quality is not quality as in, is this good ore or bad ore, for example. It's more like, am I doing what I should be doing? And is my work to spec? And then cost is, what everybody hinges on. It's like, what's the bottom line? Are we on budget? Are we estimating correctly? This kind of looks at how the history has gone here. But in the past, it would have been just a manned aircraft, if anything, to collect this kind of information, and you might have been able to get this once or twice annually. What we're seeing now is people are starting to get into that, saying, okay, you know what, I'm starting to gain value here, and I'm going to start doing some monthly collection. And what we see in the near future is people really breaking down either weekly or even daily collection of data to maximize that value. And the real ROI is in that consistent and constant collection of data and interpretation of that data. So if we think of like the value to you or to your customers, there's these key areas. It's accurate surveys available for collaborative analysis, help people on site to make good data-driven decisions based on the data that's available to them. Of course, drones overall and the ability to collect data in this way improves safety. You're no longer having to walk up and down piles, for example, when you're trying to collect measurements. It's allowing people miles away to save travel time and costs. So these are all like the things that you can speak to any of the customers that you're engaging with, or if you're in this industry and you have to, in one of these industries and you're trying to sell it up the ladder to your boss, it's the same thing, right? Like, it's like, hey, there are incredible ways for us to save time and costs. It's a visual and digital record of everything that's changed on the site over time. We're uniquely able to ingest or take in like data that's been previously processed. That's something that Propeller does, because we know that it's important for people to be able to have that kind of visual timeline and historical timeline, and everything's included. There's nothing like that's outside of what can be done within Propeller. All the image processing, ground control, analytics, reporting, hosting, everything's included in the license fees. Here's some quick stories on some where that value has come in. So in terms of productivity, we have an example where a civil contractor in Kentucky, they were spending 72 hours a month flying and processing 3 work sites with a different drone mapping tool, and that's almost 2 full work weeks. So they began using Aero points for ground control alongside our platform, and they were able to fly and process the same 3 sites in just 7.5 hours. So that's a 90% reduction in the time spent. In terms of progress tracking, simply because they couldn't accurately track progress to prove that a certain amount of dirt wasn't in their scope of work. This civil contractor in California was spending upwards of $2 million every year on unforeseen earthworks projects. So by using Propeller to unlock that real-time or quasi-real-time insights on their earthwork movement, the contractor was able to identify discrepancies early, and as projects progressed and they submitted data-driven change orders, which ultimately increased net profits by $2.5 million, so a 50% increase. And in terms of cost reductions, there was a leading U.S. aggregate and construction company. They're in search of ways to decrease costs to increase profit margin. They're willing to adopt these new technologies into their workflow, and they cut quarry stockpile survey costs by 75%, from $1,800 to $250 per survey by using Propeller. So I'm going to kind of stop right there for that part of the presentation. I will just touch a little bit on the Aero points more. Like, so here's the Aero point The GPS is between, like, just under the crosshairs. There's a Wi-Fi chip and a battery and a solar panel, so that they don't need to be like plugged in to charge. We don't have them run out of battery. They have a 45-hour reserve battery, and it takes like from 0 to 100%. I think it's 16 hours to charge the Aero points. They come in a pack of 10. Everything's been like very, purposefully designed. So the colors you see oftentimes in a normal traditional kind of ground control target is black and white, but these are a 17% gray. And I always like to say that because it's like, whoa, what does that mean? Well, it's like they're not a 16 and they're not an 18%. Like it's everything's been done so that these work for the purpose that they're built. And that's to be on active work sites and during like peak aerial surveying times. And so the gray, the slight gray, instead of it being white, is so that the images, the center of that target doesn't blow out when the sun's nice and high overhead. So they've all been purposely made for this industry. And, they work. We've got thousands of customers, thousands of these Aero points out in customers' hands who have been very successful. They come in, like I said, in a pack of 10, and they come with two carrying bags, two Aero stencils, so that if you want to put an Aero point over top of a known point, because there's no actual hole in the middle, because that's where the GPS is, we give this stencil out, and you can spray paint around the stencil and then place the Aero point on top of there. Or you can also make some semi-permanent ground control points. So, that might last a month or two, so that you don't have to put all your Aero points out every time if you're going back to a site over and over again. And one of the key things is that repeatability. So if you're on a work site where the only thing you need to do is just go fly it once, Aero points are great. They're fantastic. They'll still produce that desired result. But the real key is when you have to go back over and over again, when somebody cares about what's changing on a site, and if they're doing that weekly or monthly, Aero points don't have to be put in the same locations. They can be tossed out where it's convenient, but again, with those, best practices of putting them around the perimeter and so on. But it's one of those tools that you can just have in the back of your truck or have in the back of your car, toss them out, and you're set up and going. You don't need to calibrate any equipment and so on. You don't need to have any expertise to use them. One of the things that we have is a corrections network. So a lot of construction sites, for example, in the US, they rely on those local calibrations. So this is not necessarily that important to them, because they have their own internal local coordinate system, and so all you would do there is you place one Aero point on a known point on that site, and then it corrects all the other remaining 9 Aero points. But if you are in any kind of state plane, or if you need just access to the corrections network, this map here, and you can see the link here, and happy to share the link with those afterwards, gives you the coverage that we have in the US. So it's very, relatively speaking, it's very dense. Obviously, there's some pockets where the coverage isn't spectacular, but for the most part, very good coverage. Even if you're outside of the coverage, there's still several other ways to correct the Aero points. And again, we can kind of get into that in some of the questions if necessary. I'm going to drop this down and then just pop into the platform really quick. Maybe I'll take a breather here and just see if everyone, Chris or Logan, can everybody still hear me okay?
Yep, I can still hear you.
Okay, great. I'm just going to pop into the platform. So this is what it looks like when you hop into Propeller. You have an Aero points tab, and this is where you would go and choose like how you want to process your Aero points, whether it's with the corrections network, and that's super fast, and you can download your reports, or you can take the corrected data as a CSV file and then use it in a different product if you so choose. But like I said at the beginning, if you use this with the Propeller platform, there's nothing else to do. You just upload your images. You say, this is my Aero point survey, and we'll process them together. There's no like human tagging of images like would be required in any other program. This is the platform. When you come in, everything is in 3D by default, like I mentioned. So like your whole site and everything you do on it is in 3D. Some of the things that are key or unique to Propeller that wouldn't be found in like a lot of other products, for example, is that intelligent filtering. So I apologize if I have some like internet lag here between between myself and you, which I'm sure I will. But if everyone can see here, there's a conveyor belt, and what would happen here is that this artifacting of the conveyor belt would distort the number, the volume calculated of this stockpile. And so if I come in here and I turn on the layers and I make this a point cloud, it'll take a second for it to populate in. If I tilt it on its side, I think that you'll be able to see that, there are in fact those residuals, or artifacting from that conveyor belt. And, the person who needs the answer, the person who wants to know how much is in this stockpile, doesn't want that conveyor belt calculated, but they probably also don't want to be the person that has to know this information, that, oh, I've got a conveyor belt over top of that, I've got to do something about that, or else it's going to, skew my numbers. So what we do is we intelligently filter it out. And as you can see, when I tilt this on its side, we filtered out that conveyor belt automatically, as I like to say, for the customer, so that they don't have to do it, and so that when they're measuring this stockpile, or this greater stockpile here, they get just the actual number in there, and they're not measuring the machines or the equipment that are on top of it. So intelligent filtering. Along the bottom here, you can see we have a timeline feature, and every data set that belongs to a site can be on that timeline. And so here we have 5 data sets that have been collected on this one site, and you can pan through them at any time and see how the site has changed. So you can go forwards, you can go backwards, you can see how the site has changed over time. And like I said, anything that you can see, you can actually measure. So if we wanted to measure the difference between a stockpile, or if we wanted to measure what's changed on a site in terms of its design, we can do that. Over here, I'm just going to flip over to a different type of work site. This is a construction site, and so what's really important here are typically like measuring things against the design, seeing how they're performing against the design. So I'll just quickly show how something like that can be done very easily in Propeller. So you just grab this tool, and we're going to go compare to latest design. That's what we want to do, and I'll just check this section out here to see, hey, maybe this is the section that we're working on this week, and I need to know how that is performing against the design. So you can, there's all of these are editable, and you can change the labels and so on, but I'll just go quickly through that. And any of these shapes that you see that I've built, you can import these as well. So that's simple to do as well if you already have like pre-existing shapes that you want to import and then measure. But here what we can do is we're going to turn on this dynamic cut and fill map. And what this does is it allows the user to see exactly where material needs to go, whether it needs to be added or taken away from this specific spot, because underneath what we're doing is we're comparing it to the latest design. We're comparing the drone survey that was just taken, to the design survey, or the design surface, which anyone can upload. So here we have, these are completely editable, but what you can see here is like a dead band or a translucent band, like the transparent band, where we've set a threshold of 0.33 of a foot. You can change that. Like, for example, if you want that, a lot tighter, you can just pull these in, or you can actually, edit the numbers yourself if you want, and just create a custom number in there. But what that does, it will change what the heat map looks like. We'll just give it a second here to populate. But then if we hover over any specific area, it will tell us exactly what needs to happen there. So we have the drone surface, and then we have the target surface, and we know that we have to we have to take away 0.26 feet before we reach that target surface. And that's exactly what someone who works on this type of site wants to know. They need to know what needs to happen to this area so that I'm progressing against that design. So that's just an example of that. I mean, I have tons more examples, and we could spend a lot of time going through like every feature and function and so on, but just trying to give a little brief overview of this. The other thing would be that, you know, everything is, it can be branded for the end user here. You see that it's Maverick Drone Systems with Maverick's colors and so on. I have my own like kind of custom portal, and I'll show you one other neat thing in here, and that's on tiled models. So sometimes anybody who's been in and done this before and seen photogrammetry knows that you get this melted ice cream effect sometimes when you're doing photogrammetry, and that's okay. Like generally, it doesn't affect the actual measurement of like volume. So what happened here was there was a rock slide, and so if we wanted to measure, you know, how much material was in here, we could do that, but it doesn't look very pretty. You know, it's like kind of all like give that spiky and kind of melted ice cream look. And so what we can do here is we can turn on the tiled model, and this is like an extra feature or something that, you know, gets done at the processing time, but it's something that can make the information look as good as it actually measures. So here, if we give it a second here to kind of like reprocess this in the cloud, you'll be able to see that it's a much more detailed model, and it looks a lot nicer. It's not that kind of melted ice cream effect, and everything looks like really great as a 3D model. So that's all I'm gonna show for now. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look over any of the questions that have gone on, and then maybe we'll open it up to questions from everybody else.